talking about the past is something that I've spent a lot of time on this channel doing, to be honest with you. And I have a lot of reasons for this that I've told myself as a creator. The main one being that my story can teach and inspire like any other creator would say to themselves, to feel better about talking about their past, to feel better about sharing things that are deep, sharing adversities, sharing struggles, sharing not so privileged experience, right? But the thing about this is there's a theme to keep up with. That's the first thing. We tell our stories and we have story based content because there is a theme. And the past, of course, will always exist. Of course, the past versions of ourselves will always exist. The things and the people and the actions that I've taken over the years, that I've been involved with over the years, I'm extremely embarrassed about at first when I realize my bullshit. Like, this can happen to all of us, this can ebb and flow throughout life, and this can be a part of integrating into life, right? When, that's kind of the first sign, and it could be a process of a couple of years. I know that with some ending relationships, it's taken like a couple of years long to understand these weird feelings that would come up, to meditate silently, to like meditate away the thoughts, right, that we want to avoid. But that's the first thing I notice, is that I start to get like, when it comes to collaboration in creating content or in life integrating, I start to want to cut things shorter and shorter, or I start to feel different things. Like, you'll notice the signs of like what's going on with you when you know that you're growing into something in your future and your past is going further and further behind you. Like, you'll know when you have a distance between you and your past. And it is definitely still your past. There are footprints and all these different things. But just because you might have done a traumatic thing, or you've made a terrible decision that you had no idea you were really responsible for, no one's ever made you feel responsible. No one has ever taught you that you are responsible for your actions. That is something you've had to learn. And sometimes people learn this before they have a chance to grow up, and other times they grow up too fast. And other times, and that's just circumstance in life and family dynamics and childhood dynamics and parenting dynamics and all these reasons, right? But at the same point, by learning responsibility, you're going to feel feelings of humiliation sometimes. You're going to feel extremely painful feelings and regrets sometimes. Like, if at the end of the day you can say, I have no regrets, that's only when you've put enough distance between yourself and the past. You are not your past if you've earned that. But I can't tell you if you've earned that or not. That is something you have to do. That is your own experience. You are not your past if you've moved far enough away from your past. And until you recognize that you're not the person who ate all the food in the fridge, for instance, just a small example, right? Maybe last week you ate all the food in the fridge and it caused a huge fight, and you have a big family in your house to deal with, right? Maybe you sort of like recommended a book. Here's an embarrassing one. You recommend a book, I've done this, and you're so excited because you think you know the author of the book. And then you either follow the author more or you read further into the book and then you cancel the book, or you've decided that that author doesn't align with your values. You've kind of understood that maybe there are things you like about the author, maybe there are traits you have that relate to the author, for instance, or the brand behind the book, right? But, and I've done this a little bit. I can't say I've done this with books that much because I'm very picky for good reason about the books that I read. But I've done it a little bit, a couple times. And that has a lot to do with just my past self actually changing so much. If you're not embarrassed of your past self, then that's when you're still your past actually. There should be times. It sucks to be embarrassed. It sucks to be like self-conscious about seeing yourself, right? Like if you've posted something online that you wish you hadn't. We've all kind of been in the social media is wonderful, let's share everything moment, even if it was like a short time that you thought something would be funny or cute or whatever. And in this sense, whew, yeah, intense, right? Like in this sense, you know that there are things, people, places you've been embarrassed to be at that do not align with you anymore. Maybe you've had a drunken weekend or two that you were embarrassed about. Maybe you've just totally sort of were in bad relationships that just didn't align with who you are, and you're embarrassed that those relationships were so prevalent or such a priority in your life, and you're embarrassed about it. Maybe you were really unhealthy at one point and didn't you weren't very active at all, and you're embarrassed that people of importance or people who are successful might have seen you in that light, and you're not that person anymore. But just as you also have a right to realize that you are not your past, your past also has the right to distance itself from you as you grow and change direction. So there's both sides to it. It's not all about you having a sense of attached control over situations. It's more about a sense of acceptance, pure radical acceptance. And it's not as easy as getting into some deep meditation. It's so embarrassing how deep meditations I used to get into, and how much I would share these meditations as if it was like the only way or the one solution. I was fixated on the fascination of mindfulness so much from a few select people at the time that I sort of shared it and paraded it around like some sort of relationship cult religion, right? Like, that's really something that I've been embarrassed about. But the thing about that is, like, if you guys have seen me at the time on Twitter, on X, you will know, like, I'm a completely different person. I post completely different things. I'm still taking an interest in mindfulness and people who are including meditation, but I do it in a different way. I don't take an interest in fixating on meditation as the only way. I certainly do meditate. And I had to disconnect from the past by talking on this show about how meditation is not always your friend sometimes. Meditation can be just as much of an addiction as junk food. Can be bad for your action, can give you this huge, it's kind of like being addicted to productivity. You've written a whole calendar in one day of your life, but you haven't done anything. You've procrastinated on all your chores. It's the same thing. Having a calendar, or in my case, prompting my life, is excellent actually. prompting my life and really going deep into my life and conversating and analyzing everything is wonderful, as long as I'm doing the things that move me forward throughout my life. And that's just it. People want to paint the future as bad. They want to stay in the past, even though they say that we are not our past, right? People want to stay in the past. They choose to find comfort continuously. They choose to seek out comfort from nostalgia in parts of the past, to the point where we paint the future as villain, when okay, maybe there are things that could happen potentially, maybe there are potentially bad outcomes, but what we're then doing is victimizing our circumstances, society's circumstances. So there's a couple of different sort of like caveats. The first is that the past is the enemy, which is not always the case. Sometimes the past is there to remind us of things that we needed to learn. And you don't have to necessarily repress the past, but sometimes the past is the sort of a comfort addiction, kind of like productivity, no better than the productivity addictions I've had in the past, no better than the meditation addictions and mindfulness addictions that I've sort of disconnected, I've gotten away from. I don't want to say that in a sense. I'm careful how I say that, because I do practice mindfulness, I do meditate, but I do it, I've taught myself authentically how do I want to meditate, instead of letting somebody teach me how to meditate. And then if I need the feedback loop or the guidance, I definitely use AI. But if I were doing absolutely nothing with my life, and if I were procrastinating, and if I were sitting around, AI would be bad. AI would be awful. AI would be isolating. AI would be contributing to the downfall of society and conspiracy, because I'm doing nothing with my own life and have nothing to show for it, right? If that were the case. But I can say I'm playing sports, and it's really nice to get back into sports. I'm learning what sports I like nowadays. I'm getting back into arts and crafts. I'm actually getting back to a lot of things I forgot about just by getting out of the wrong relationships. I'm getting back to things I thought were unrelated to my collaborations, or the things that I didn't feel like I was allowed to take an interest in, like arts and crafts, especially, and creativity and sports, and even interest in sort of understanding and learning about money, but not in a sort of greedy way at all, but just from a sort of like interest standpoint. I love the idea of currency and trade and value, and this sort of the way that we would always trade different things, like value for value kind of a thing. Forms of trade is really what currency is in my book. It's not just about cash or money or riches. Forms of trade as a whole, I'm interested in more. I've found I'm not as interested in the sort of financial education as we've currently been taught. I'm interested more in forms of trade. So that's something that I've let go of in the past, about my myths about forms of trade, my myths about money, things that I used to be embarrassed about. Just not being patient enough, showing signs of greed, not completely being intentionally greedy, but showing signs of greed that I had to base off of knowing that I was in relationships that were no longer aligning with me. Once you get out of those relationships, that greed and selfishness tends to go away, because you no longer feel that yourself is being threatened, or that your family is being threatened, or that your resources are being drained. And those are good lessons to learn. That's why I always say, whether it's my music or my writing, my prompt engineering, you could say, that goes into my music and my writing and all of that, and just here on this show, whether it's the channel, the podcast, nothing is ever a waste of time. No one is ever a waste of time, because your past is still the lessons you've had to learn. And even though your past has existed, even though the things you do cause and effect, things affect you, things affect those around you, or the lack of action will also affect you or those around you. That may all be true. But if you work towards growth and a future, then that's when you accept and realize, radical acceptance, that you are not your past. I can get deeper into this with episodes of Breaking This Down. I don't think going into a huge philosophical episode is going to convey the point, and that's why my content maintains a better structure if I break things down a little better for you at this point, instead of doing what I did in the past and trying to be just like other philosophers, instead of doing things the way that I would approach things, which is, philosophy can be long-winded, and I love a good philosophy day of watching a huge video. I love that. Shout out to all the philosophers out there. I think that those are really cool, but my approach tends to be that we can live in philosophy, not just talk about philosophy. So that would require, we have to break these things down and go about our lives and flow within our day. And then with each episode, it's a ripple effect. It can connect to another episode or relate on its own. And that's not up to me to decide. That's up to you, how you interpret things. But at least in any case, you can flow about your life and you don't have to stop. You don't always have to, unless you want to, because like I said, there's something to be said about long videos, long podcast episodes. And you can break things down and go through the flow of life with me, where we're kind of going through it together. So that's really the takeaway, that still, even with your past existing, even with things affecting you and your loved ones, even with evidence of having a past and what was in that past, as long as you're moving forward, you are not your past.